Addiction, a word we commonly hear in society today, but we do not realize the severity of that word. When one thinks of addiction, he normally thinks of drugs or alcohol, which is true. For example, in 2009, 4.6 million Americans ages 12 and up said they had abused cocaine in some form in their life. In that same year, 16 million Americans ages 12 and up said they had used prescription medication, sedatives, or tranquilizers for non-medicinal purposes. But the point I want to impress upon you today is that addiction goes beyond drugs and alcohol. For example, in 2009, 47% of American families say that pornography is a serious problem within their household. Addiction is a serious problem, and it can ruin anyone who gets in this path. But addiction goes beyond what we normally think of for drugs and alcohol, and into daily things like sex, gambling, and even eating. All of those things can be serious addictions and can seriously ruin someone's life as much or even worse as drugs can. Now, the first addiction that I want to point out to you is obviously drugs. In 2009, 600,000 Americans ages 12 and up said that they had abused heroin. Now, I have a personal testimony from an ex-heroin addict who is now a religious brother in the St. Thomas More Society. He first used heroin when he was 17 years old with his friends as a fun and pleasurable experience. He used it for the next 2 years until he became addicted, seriously addicted, by age 19. I have by him a quote that says, "I lost all love for human beings. I only loved heroin." He was seriously addicted for the next 9 years, in and out of rehab centers, and had lost everything until age 28 when he finally started coming out of his addiction for heroin. Now, of course, I've already said it, drugs and alcohol is a serious addiction that we normally think of. But addiction can go into society in terms of fun and recreational activities such as gambling. Gambling is a serious addiction that can ruin anyone's life. Now, I live 30 miles from casinos in Oklahoma where 18-year-olds can gamble, and I have personally seen the effects of what a gambling addiction can do. One of my friends, who has now dropped out of Pittsburg State University because he just gambles all the time, has moved out of his house and has literally thrown his entire life away. He's not the same person we knew 2 years ago. If that's not enough, I have another personal testimony from an ex-gambler who was addicted to gambling. His name is John. John was addicted to gambling for 10 years before his wife even found out. And she only found out because of the severe financial depression that the couple fell into. Now, John said that it destroyed his family and it destroyed his finances, but it also destroyed his soul. Now, how can something that can destroy a person's soul, destroy a person's finances, destroy a person's family, and destroy a person's future, how can that take over someone's life if they don't want to do it, if it's not an addiction? Gambling is indeed a serious addiction. Another type of addiction is sex addiction. Now, we have seen a perfect example of addiction to sex in the past 3 years with a very famous person named Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods was the highest paid athlete in the world, had hundreds of sponsorships, had a beautiful wife, a beautiful home, had the respect for himself and respect of millions around the world. And all of that was thrown away in one night when his addiction to sex came out. Now, if this is not a fair enough example, I have another example from an ex-sex addict. This sex addict said he had no control over what he was doing. His sex addiction was a response to pain, and he somehow got this pleasurable pain through sex. He says, quote, "The real problem was that I couldn't relate with people unless I was having sex with them," end quote. Now, this started at a young age with him as he was raised in his family. His family was raised that secrets were secrets and truth was truth, and that the two could not be intertwined. Also, he said he had no role models for intimacy when he was younger. A sex addiction takes something that is good and that is beautiful and that happens a lot in today's society, which is sex, and it twists it into evil to where the person loses his free will, his or her free will, and now cannot stop. The final addiction I want to talk about is the addiction to eating. Now, within this addiction, there are two subpoints I want to touch on. The first one is obviously obesity. Now, how many obese people do you see when you just go to Walmart, or you go to Wendy's, or you go to the supermarket? More than you stop to think about. Now, obesity is indeed sometimes genetic, and it's not bad. It's not a problem at all. But sometimes it can relate from a psychological disorder that is addiction, where a person's brain does not register that he is full. So the pleasure sensors never get filled up, therefore the body keeps eating. Eventually, this leads into a long, long line, and it can lead to depression, to where the only relief from that depression is indeed the pleasure from eating. The second thing I want to impress upon you about the eating disorder, or about the eating addiction, is eating disorders, which is the opposite of what obesity is normally. If you think of bulimia, for example, the act of consuming large amount of calories a day and then purging yourself of those calories. Now, the act of purging is not a pleasurable experience, but over time, the body can come to recognize that as some sort of sick, pleasurable experience. For instance, the gagging reflex. The body can eventually recognize that that is a habit, that is a pleasurable experience, and the person won't even want to throw up, but the gagging experience is such a rush that they want to get there. Now, in conclusion, I've pointed out 3 addictions other than drugs and alcohol: addiction to sex, addiction to gambling, and addiction to food. Now, all 3 of these things have been proven with these testimonies and more today that they can ruin your life in such a way as drugs and alcohol can, sometimes even more. Every one of these people have lost their free will in doing things that they love: gambling, sex, and eating. When the free will goes away, that's when the addiction steps in. Addiction is real, and we all know someone personally who struggles with some sort of addiction, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. Addiction is serious business, and it can really creep up on anybody. To prove that, I want to leave you with a quote. It says, "Watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny." Addiction to anything can ruin a person's life and eventually control a person's destiny. If your habit is addiction, then your addiction will be your destiny. Addiction is ruining lives today, left and right.